So welcome to our second webinar. We're looking today at kind of how to support loved ones. This is a difficult time we're kind of living through at the moment. So we're going to have a little look, but we've got our guest, Danny Rahim, with us today. Danny, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself in a second, but we've got loads of questions. We had a fair few come in over the last week, but this morning we've had another 10 or so. So I think what would be really nice is if we look at some of the questions, and hopefully that might answer a lot of what other people are thinking, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
So how are you? How has lockdown life been?
It's a big question. How are you? Isn't it? It covers so many facets these days. How are you? You can't just kind of what we've been talking about when we asked that. But how am I? I think in life in general, I feel quite content at the moment. Routines and structures, things that I've learned over the past 6 months that I've had to kind of get on top of, really, to keep sort of a positive mindset. And as a result, I think a lot of changes have occurred in my life that have meant that actually I'm going, if I had been in my normal kind of busyness, I may not have had that time to just pause and reflect and be like, oh, that's actually not serving me. That's serving me really well, like, you know, and picking the direction that I want to travel with these things. So in general, I'd say I'm quite content. I'm just, you know, I wake up, I make sure I'm exercising, doing my little bits, having my walks, but yeah, just taking things as they come, not trying not to stress too much about things.
I think that's the key, isn't it, at the moment? But it's very, it's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
And also, I've already broken the kind of cardinal rule of just saying, how are you? Which is actually something we probably should get out the habit of doing, shouldn't we? We should definitely, I think, when we're asking people how they are, ask them more around how they're feeling, what they've been up to, more kind of direct questions and just how are you? Because that often, I think, at work and places like that, you ask how are you, people go, yeah, I'm good, thanks, how are you? And you're like, yeah, I'm fine, and then there's no conversation whatsoever.
Yeah,
I didn't start that off very well, to be honest.
Well, no, it's probably good because it's opened it up for discussion, and you know, I think that is the question at the moment. When you say to someone that we're very polite as Brits or wherever you're from, we kind of don't ever want to burden people with our problems. So it's like someone's genuinely saying to you, how are you? And you go, immediately you kind of have this deep, oh yeah, things might be terrible at the moment. Yeah, good, thanks. You go, oh good. And it's just kind of how we've been built over years. But what I found worked particularly well, I've got a little niece who's 11. So I say, how are you 1 to 10? Or I say, how's your ship today? And a ship, you know, as we've discussed before, is a way of her kind of being like, well, actually, I'm not talking about me, but if I was a ship. And so she'll be like, plain sailing in sunny waters, or she'll be like, oh, it's a bit choppy today, or I've had lots of homework and it's weighing down heavily on my ship. And you know, so it's trying to be a little bit creative in getting away from what our default question and therefore the default responses will be, and actually making people think a bit more in depth about what they are responding to. And so I always think numbers can work very well, and also how's your ship, you know, is another good way to actually tap in a little bit. And also to compare, it's easy to say I'm a 6 today and I was a 5 yesterday. When you say otherwise, it's either good, not great. You know, we've got about 3 words that we kind of tend to use with all of that.
Yeah, and actually you're right. Like, what does that actually mean then when we say we're good? Are we, you know, so giving it a number, I think that's a really good example. We actually have some questions about children and how to support them. We'll talk about those later. Yeah, but just for the people on here who may not know who you are and what you've done, do you want to give us a little overview?
A little overview. So I started. I'm an actor and mental health ambassador. That journey began. So the acting side of things, I went to drama school in 2005, graduated in 2008. I went on to film a sort of number of TV shows in the UK. Some people may have seen them. I was in EastEnders, Vera.
I think a fair few people have probably seen EastEnders.
Yeah, but perhaps not my episode. But yeah, it's the one that my mum always goes, oh, he was in EastEnders. But actually, we sort of don't really even put that on the CV anymore. But yeah, a lot of sort of ITV dramas and bits and pieces. And I think for me, what's kind of more exciting is the kind of the mental health side of things, and not necessarily how I got into it. When I was 13, my mum had a car accident and was diagnosed with depression and then bipolar, and and still to today actually has quite poor mental health, which requires constant management. But I think from the age of 13, I just grew up with that, and I didn't realize as I was kind of almost a primary carer for mum. Dad passed away, unfortunately, which was another thing that added to my eventual mental health breakdown, which was in 2013. And so I had a series of unfortunate events that kind of compounded, I guess. I had all mum's accident when she was 13. She unfortunately lost her baby at that point. Then that sent her into a spiral. Me as a carer, I had to live with Gran. My sister had to go into care. And then you get to 16 and you kind of are sort of like an adult, but you're not really. And at that point, I was allowed to live where I wanted to. So social services separated. Yeah, I kind of, I guess, learned the hard way, really, like the show must go on. And that's what I thought it was. It was the show was going on. I didn't have time or space to cry or feel or to grieve, or, it's just, keep calm and carry on, I guess, was what I thought at that time. So I went to drama. Luckily, I got a space in drama school, went to Manchester to go and do that. That was lovely to get away from it all. And it was distraction for a while, I guess. But at some point, you have to come back and face reality, right? And so that was literally distraction, come back, face the music. And at that point, I had another series of unfortunate events. I broke my foot. Mum was very, very, I'm aware of what age range we've kind of got listeners in. But mum was hospitalized with her illness, and a lot of it basically took its toll, and which ended up in me late 2013 having a breakdown myself. And subsequently, I just thought, I've got to understand this. How did that happen? What was I saying or not saying, or how did I get to that point? So I started to do a lot of research and study, and so I had acting going alongside there, and I had this kind of health and well-being side kind of developing on this, and I really enjoyed that. Very passionate about this side, and I now go into a lot of schools and I talk about mental well-being or mental fitness, and that's sort of how it's evolved. And I sort of met you through that, and I came and did some training at your former workplace, and we've had a really good relationship since. And it's just a really exciting space to be in, because I think a lot of people, and I know it's a difficult time at the moment for a lot of people, but it's also a time now that people are a lot more inquisitive and open-minded and willing to ask the questions and do the thinking and work on themselves. And that for me is hugely positive, because I believe that we are living, or we're living for a long time, in this life of distraction. We were living in this life that was me going up to Manchester and putting a plaster on it. And actually now what we're having to do is really sit with it at home in our chairs and go, what is actually going on here? Okay, I need to understand it a bit further, and then I need to address it. And that for me is really, really positive.
It is. It's really positive, but it's also very hard to do, isn't it? I think sometimes, because I've been in that situation where I've developed distraction techniques for years and years, where I didn't, come to terms with anything that had been going on. And I think it's when you do finally kind of sit down and realize, what you've created has kind of had a huge effect on your mental health. It's then trying to work out, how do you fix that? How do you learn to kind of recover from those things, I think. And that could be very difficult. I was just going to touch on there with part of your story. So you mentioned about when you'd hurt your foot.
Yeah.
That's because some of that spiraled, didn't it? And the intrinsic link between physical and mental health sometimes. Yeah. Do you mind just letting people know kind of what happened when you broke your leg?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was 2012. I had just finished a TV project I was filming in Canada, came back to the UK, was supposed to be starting a job with the BBC, and on my little Vespa, the front wheel just kind of wobbled and it turned out there was actually a loose bolt in the wheel. But anyway, that's another story. And so it ended up the bike slid under me. I wasn't going very fast, but it fell on my foot and I broke my foot, which meant that I was in a cast for almost 2 months, which subsequently meant I couldn't do the BBC filming job that I was supposed to do. So I was sat at home. I, had this lovely flat that I was very fortunate to have been able to buy, because of the TV stuff originally had gone very well. And You know, amongst my peers, it was like, Danny, he's like doing so well. He's like, oh my God, the agent he's got, the shows that he's doing, you know, I was on paper killing it. But when I was sat there with a broken foot, and I remember I've taken a photo of it, and I do it in some of my training, and it's just me sat there, and I've got all this lovely stuff around me, but I've got a broken foot, and it was a really kind of badly broken foot that I was like on crutches to the toilet, all like even around the house. There was no kind of like, and I did feel helpless, and I did feel alone, and and there was not much I could do with this foot, and I was feeling sorry for myself. And compound on top of that, I had mum that was very unwell because dad had passed away. She was struggling with that. I broke up with my girlfriend, probably as a knock-on effect of all of this stuff. You know, we push those people away that we love the furthest sometimes, because we're too proud to take that support, and there's the pride element, and you know, so who knows what was the foundation of all of that. But yeah, essentially I was very helpless, and I sat there, and I remember there were many nights I was just in bed and I was just crying myself to sleep. And you know, on paper I've got everything, like particularly for my age, back like 25, maybe 26 I was like, but it didn't matter what I realized in the end, because you know, the foot and being incapacitated, but then there was pain, and there was the trauma, and then there was the helplessness. And what that manifested in was just me just being there and being sad and lonely and deeply depressed, but I didn't realize it at the time. And of course, when I had messaged friends, and they'd be like, Danny, like, you know, you were amazing on that show, and when this happened, all of that now I realized was irrelevant, because what was the most important, was how I was lying in bed every evening, and very sad. And that was a point actually that Johnny and I reconnected quite, because you know, I'd seen his Stranger on the Bridge come up, and I was like, mate, I can't believe you were going through all this stuff. I've been going through a really tough time. And you know, it just, a lot of the pieces of the puzzle came together around that time. And I
I
guess
think
now,
from
yeah.
what you just said there, and then kind of reaching out to other people, that's something that we need to kind of know how to do, but also know how to do, like ourselves, how we ask other people, because we don't always need to wait for somebody to ask us, do we? There's ways we can ask other people how they're doing, you know, and how we can potentially support them. I think the reason I asked you about that is because I know how that kind of manifested itself into, you know, more of a decline in your mental health, didn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
You know, just on top of that, you then had your family that needed your support, didn't you? You know, there was just so much going on. And I think, to be honest, at the moment with lockdown and things like that, so many families are feeling these things, you know, whether it is somebody who has hurt their leg, whether it is somebody who isn't getting out and about and doing things that they used to do. You know, all these things can have a knock-on effect to our mental health, can't they?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's kind of realizing that sometimes. I think with what you've said there, some of that will really resonate with people. And, you know, thank you for sharing about your mum. I know that that's a very personal thing sometimes.
Yeah, no,
but
of course.
I think with some of the questions we've got, actually, the first one, if I ask if you're okay to kind of answer and see what you think. I know I've got my own ideas, but somebody's asked how we would deal with our partner's depression when there is no external distraction at the moment. So there's no theatre, there's no being able to go out and see friends and family, things that we would perhaps normally do. You know, what's your take on that? How would we maybe try and support somebody who's living with depression at the moment, but not being able to do the things they normally do to help?
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, isn't it? The normal things, like what is normal things? Those normal things, the theatre, you know, for some countries and places that do have experience the same depression rate, they don't have theatre, they don't have. So distraction for me is like a walk in the park. And it's like, we can take this to its basest term, like walking during this time has been so essential for my positive well-being. So a walk is an activity, a cycle is an activity. You know, there are so many things that we can do that I think we're very quick to say, oh, like, and this sounds like I'm not being very sympathetic to the situation. I'm totally aware, but I feel like there comes a level of accountability where we've got to say, like, there is so much that we are very, very blessed for in the UK that we have and have access to, and things that we can do and just watch Netflix and go for a walk and maybe have a bike ride or whatever it is, wherever you live. There is so much that we can do. what the difficulty is that we're not used to it.
Mm.
It's not the normal thing we do, and I can't go to the theatre anymore. And I think it's just reinventing it a little bit, like finding new things you love. Like I did this super brain like memory workshop for a month. So for 30 days I had to spend 20 minutes a day, and just doing this online course. And I loved it. I was excited every day. I had a focus. Like I've also taken another level in this counseling that I'm doing. So there's a lot of online training that actually there was a point that universities were giving out for free.
I
So
think the trouble is sometimes I think with depression is people don't feel like doing that, isn't it? So
yeah,
I think it's how do we encourage, I know for me, I'm not living with depression or anything, but I know my motivation has been low. I know my, kind of ability to get up and get out. And so I think you're absolutely right. It's about looking at what those small wins are, isn't it?
yeah,
What are
exactly.
the things we can do to find joy at the moment?
And cooking, like I never cooked before, and I've my daily activity now, because I was so busy and I was always like, food is my fuel. I need to work. The work and the training's more important, and then food was just a fuel. So it would be going to Pret and ordering a salad and getting a salad bowl, but just quick. Now I go to the supermarket and I got a recipe book, and I started using the slow cooker and getting excited about cooking in the morning. There is so much for us to do. It just might require a bit more imagination, and some thinking into what could I now do that's slightly different. And just to put some context onto this, so my uncle at the moment is very depressed. He was in the police for 50 years. He just retired, and he's been very down about he took on this kind of building project that he wanted to do in his retirement, and it's kind of all fallen apart, and he's been deeply depressed. He's called me crying many days, and I'm a mental health trainer. I'm supposed to be this kind of all-knowing, but I still am helpless in the situation in helping him. But what I do know is I can advise him on things, and I can get him to sign up to this talk or this men's only group or whatever it is. But I did all that, and then he didn't end up going. And so what I've realized through all of this is there is a level of accountability that, or leading a horse to water. And, so that person, whoever they are, if they're not feeling great, you've got to be kind and compassionate and supportive. But ultimately, it's got to be that person that picks up the phone or goes on a website or texts out or does whatever, because otherwise it becomes this endless cycle of you organizing stuff for them and trying to suggest stuff and them not going. And then everyone's disappointed.
Well, that leads nicely onto one of the other questions, actually, because somebody has asked, and I think it's a very common concern. So we often say that moods can be contagious, don't we? So if you're in a great mood, then that's contagious. If you're in a good mood, that can also be. So somebody's asked, how do they stop their kind of difficult mental health challenge at the moment, kind of having a knock-on effect to their partner or their family? How do they stop that mood, kind of leveling down to them as well, and vice versa, I guess? How do you stop yourself feeling down if your partner is very down at the moment? How do we do that?
Change your environment. That's it. And I learned this through 6 years with mum bipolar. She'd be in bed for 2 weeks, and then the police would be coming around. She'd be fighting them out the house, like that, with the extremes, like shouting, swearing, 3 a.m, chaos. But I realized I was starting to pick up those rhythms, and so you've got to change your environment, and that can be the walk again. This walking solves so many issues, I'm telling you. And it's raining, but get wrapped up and go and walk. Fresh air, moving your legs, like 150 minutes of exercise, 75 to 150 minutes a week of exercise is what's recommended, right? So just over 2 hours in a week of walking, you're giving your body what it needs in terms of movement. But if you're in an environment and you're in a space and you're in a living room with someone that's not particularly well, you be kind, you be supportive, you be loving and nurturing, but also you've got to take care of yourself. And if that means changing the scenery for half an hour, going for a walk, if people aren't able-bodied to go for a walk, changing the room a little bit and having a little space where you can go up in another room and read a book, like, we have so many options to look after our well-being. And I think it's just about exploring and trying to find those, like, what do we enjoy doing?
I think often with mental health challenges, people can often overthink and think things have to be more difficult than they are. You know, I'm not doing the right thing if I'm not doing this for my partner, or if I'm not doing that. When actually, like you say, there a lot of them are very holistic, very easy and achievable to do. The walking thing, for example. And I think as well, communication is a huge part of what we need to do if we're at home with our family and, you know, one of us is depressed or one is going through something else. Communicating and being honest, like you say, if you need a bit of space or you need to go for a walk, it doesn't mean you don't love them. It doesn't mean you're not supportive. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means you need to get out, because I'm not sure whether it was you that taught me the phrase, but the putting your own oxygen mask on first. If you're feeling better and you're feeling okay, you are then much better placed to be able to look after that person. So if you go out for a walk for half an hour, you'll come back, you'll be refreshed, you'll be a little bit more chilled out, you'll be more patient, because, you know, again, you're not superhuman, you know, we're not there to be able to help, you know, everybody all the time. We think,
and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves but we're all humans with our own minds and our own thoughts and feelings, and you know, we possess the power to get through all of these things. And I know that when I was sitting and I was depressed and sitting in that chair, actually looking over and seeing my girlfriend, like at that time, just gradually getting kind of like more broken down, because seeing me depressed, and that made me feel even worse. But actually what was really nice at the end of it, and we got to a point of, is that she'd come over and she'd give me a little kiss on the head and she'd say, listen, I love you. I'm just going to have a little walk. I just need a little bit of fresh air, but give me a call if you need anything. And I then knew that, okay, she's not gone. She's still there. She, like, I can just do what I'm doing, or I can, you know, do some stretches, or I can just do my own thing for a bit. She showed me that she loves me and she cares and she's there and she understands what I'm going through. And I'm actually happier because she's taking care of herself. So I know that she's doing the things that she needs to.
Yeah, and I think you can often feel guilt as well. If you are the person who's going through the mental health challenge, you can often feel guilty about almost bringing someone else down. So like you say, actually, as a partner, to you know, remind your partner or your loved one that you love them, you're fine, you know, everything's fine, but I'm just going to go for a little walk for a bit because I need to.
But if it's not fine, just saying, hey, I'm you know, my head's a bit hazy today. I just, stuff's going on with work or whatever it is that's making you not feel, and be honest, you know, and start to create that dialogue. I'm feeling good today. Here's what I'm able to do. I'm not feeling great today. Here's what I need to do for me. And you know, that's the partnership.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just going to say on our chat, so most people probably have used Zoom before. I mean, congratulations if you have managed to avoid it for a year. But down on the bottom, there's a chat function. If anybody's got any other questions they want to add as we go along, or any questions or concerns as we go along, pop in the chat to our admin or the chat that's on there, and we'll be able to answer them as well as we go along. We have got a whole list here, so I'm going to try and go through them as many as we possibly can, because what this has proved, I think, is how many people are at the moment. You know, I don't really like the word struggling, but this lockdown has created an environment where we don't always know what to do. You know, there's no rule book. We can't Google what to do in lockdown because it's never happened before. And I think there's things that have happened which have created problems they've come across that they would never have come across before. You know, things like routines being out. You know, we are creatures of habit, and I think even the routines being out can play a part in somebody's mood. You know, them starting to feel bad. So I'm just having a little look on here. We've had a couple of questions about children. You know, obviously at the moment, massive shout out to all the mums and dads.
Absolutely.
Who have been amazing at homeschooling. I know it's been really difficult, and from what I understand, this third lockdown, is it third? Feels like.
I think this is three.
You know, this one has been epically difficult for people. So there's been a couple of questions that have been around similar veins. So one is about how you would talk about mental health or a decline in mental health to teenagers. So, I mean, I think teenagers are pretty savvy about what mental health is. You know, they are pretty good, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to deal with it, I guess. So they need to be aware of, you know, if things are starting to decline. So somebody asked that when they've tried to explain it to their daughter, she gets a bit scared, a bit upset. You know, what does that mean? I don't want my mind to go wrong. I don't want these things to happen. So any kind of hints and tips on how we might talk to teenagers specifically about mental health?
Yeah. So first of all, a big shout out to all those parents. Like my sister has my little niece, and she's working very hard, as I think most parents are at the moment. It's a very challenging time because kids aren't used to it, and parents aren't used to it, and parents are trying to work and do their bit. So yeah, I get it. And with my niece, it's like this is what this isn't professional medical advice, but this is my opinion. And from doing a lot of training with kids, when you realize that kids that are still in primary school, at the back end of primary school, i.e. year 6, are self-harming, are suicidal, you realize actually the more we try and mollycoddle and not talk about it and frame it in certain ways, the more detrimental it is. Because if kids are doing that to themselves in year 6, so what are we saying, 11 years old, and we're kind of treating them like babies at 15, 16, I don't know how old this particular teen is, we're not being honest with them, and we're not being direct. And I think it's really important. Kids are watching stuff on TV, they're hearing about it, they're reading about stuff like mental illness. So the more we can create a space of open communication and transparency is, I think, the most productive way, that we're all trying to sing from the same hymn sheet. And parents might not have the correct language or vocabulary to use, and might say something that might, but I think, to say something simple as it, sometimes when X happens, people get ill. And when they get ill, they must do X, Y, and Z to get better. That's it in its very simplest terms. I think when we start to go and we start to say depression, chemical imbalances, and think, yeah, okay, these kind of words are, because they are children who might not understand, but there's ways that we frame it and use our language to say, look, when people are sick, they'll know when, if, from when they're teeny toddlers, if someone gets sick or someone breaks their foot or someone falls off their bike or someone's got a cut on their arm, they go, oh, he just cut himself, need to put a plaster on. They go, oh, okay, put a plaster on. This is when they're 2-3 years old. So the more we frame it is that it's very common, 1 in 5 children. So that's very common. That's 4 or 5 people in a classroom will suffer with poor mental illness. And most mental illness starts, 75% of mental illness starts before a child is 18. So it's like, with those statistics, why are we not? It should be a holistic approach that's in schools, at home, and in all the training. And I think once those bits are combined and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, that's when it's not going to be a scary thing that just gets mentioned. And someone said depression, and like, I could be depressed. I don't know what depression. I don't understand the word. Then they go and start Googling what depression is, and all of a sudden they're, in this world of,
yeah, never Google anyway. But I think as well, from what you've just said there, I think the other thing we need to do, and it's not just for children but for adults, is we need to kind of get past this thing that mental health is only bad. We all have mental health, the same as we have physical health, and we have good mental health as well as poor mental health, don't we? And I think it's important that, for children and also adults, is that we celebrate and we talk about the good mental health, when we're feeling great, when we're kind of, positive, things are going well, and how that makes us feel, as well as we don't just talk about mental health when it's something bad or sinister or serious.
Well, mental health has a connotation. Mental health, we immediately imagine mental ill health. That's what we say when we say mental health. When I say I'm delivering mental health training, everyone goes, oh, mental health, I don't know if I want to talk about it. When you say mental fitness training, all of a sudden everyone goes, oh, I'll have a bit of mental fitness sounds good. Just language, small tweaks in language, exactly the same thing. The product hasn't changed, but it's how we deliver it, and how we deliver it is therefore how it will be received.
Yeah, and I think as well, you see a lot, and I'm sure you do too, we see mental health and well-being as like a title for something, whereas I feel quite strongly that actually it should just be well-being. We don't need to, it's all, mental health is part of our well-being, so well-being covers everything, doesn't it? So we don't, I think one of the things we need to do as a society is try to steer away from, mental health always being spoken about as a bad thing.
And funny you say that, because I checked, on my LinkedIn, it was health coach, counselor, like all these different names, mental health speaker, mental health. And actually all it says now is Danny Rahim, wellbeing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's
Simplify.
very important. So we've had a question about spotting signs and symptoms. This comes up a lot, especially on my courses that I do, where, so if somebody has a low mood,
Yeah.
you know, that is one of the signs and symptoms for potentially developing depression, isn't it? But what other signs can we look out for that somebody we love may be struggling, but they haven't let us know? So they've not come to us, but what can we look out for? What, especially at the moment when it's difficult to see people, you know, what are some of the signs and symptoms?
Well, personally, I'm always very cautious with signs and symptoms, okay? Because, you know, low mood is a symptom of depression, but it's also if you're hungry. And
Yeah,
so,
that's
you know,
true.
you start to build up these lists. Okay, if he or she has these 5 things and he's tired and a bit sleepy, and then all of a sudden he must be depressed. Like, for you to be diagnosed with depression with a GP or medical, you would have had to have 2 weeks of sustained X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So low mood. And what they'll do is they'll say to you, take a mood chart or a mood, and there's lots of cool little apps. There's Mood Path. They're all free, and you get like a calendar, and you just put an emoji on it. I think it's called Mood Path, the one, or there's another one called Dailyo. They're just apps. Send you a calendar, and it says you on the first you put, are you a smiley, are you a moderate, are you a sad, are you cry? You put an emoji for every day, and it allows you.
Moderate face again. Just do that again. Nice. Yeah. Sorry. Go on, as you were.
And yeah, so when you go to a GP, unless it's they're going to say to you, well, how's it been? And so when you say Monday was great, we FaceTime the family, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, he or she was a little bit low, but Wednesday we went for a walk and their mood was lifted again, they're going to be like, well, that's not depression because it's not sustained. And I think we're very quick to associate low mood is an emotion, it's a feeling, it's something we go through. You know, at times I'm elated, at times I'm sad. You know, an acting audition might come in and I'm over the moon, then I don't get it, I'm sad. That's like the rhythm. That's rhythm. That's like, and there are circumstances now, granted, that we're not able to go to school. Kids aren't able to go to school and be with their friends. And I think a big part of this is about community. I think actually a big part of all of this, sad and people feeling though, is detachment and lack of community. I think that's, you know, and where I'm not necessarily a big advocate necessarily always of screens and just getting them on the iPads and getting, you know, if an iPad a day was then to have a group chat with 3 of their schoolmates and just have a catch up and show what they're building or what they've, you know, then you've got to think of what's the greater good or the lesser evil.
No, absolutely. I think as well, change in people is good to look out for. That's the kind, because it's very hard to give like an exclusive list on things to look out for, because there's like over 300 diagnosable mental health.
Yeah.
We couldn't possibly kind of answer. I know we've had quite a few questions about signs and symptoms, but it's almost not that straightforward. I think the biggest one probably is a change in somebody for a consistent amount of time.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think, that you can get bogged down. The same signs and symptoms might be for stress, anxiety, depression. You know, you're going to have the same thing. So all of a sudden, then and we're not medical professionals here to kind of diagnose what we think. What we want to be able to do is say, okay, they have been consistently low mood or whatever it is for a week or two, and we haven't been able to work on some things to do with our self-care to pull out of that. Now, what's the next steps?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Lovely. Okay, so we've got loads of questions keep coming in. Okay, so I'm just going to read this one off. So somebody on here has a brother-in-law that's suffering with severe mental health issues at the moment. They've been hospitalized various times over the last 3 years. So what they struggle with is how often to keep in touch with them without pressurizing them, you know, without putting, you know, extra kind of pressure onto them. And they feel like they're always asking their family all the time, you know, the same sort of things. What would you recommend? I mean, that's actually a great question for you, because, you know, when your mom's been poorly, and I guess, you know, your sisters, etc. I guess there's probably not a one size fits all answer to that, because every family and every person is different. But what would be your thoughts on that?
So my immediate response to that was to differentiate what is keeping in touch and what is putting pressure on, because they're two very different things. So if someone's saying, I don't want to keeping in touch, is saying, hey, I'm here, I'm here for you. If you need me, you know, I'm a phone call away, sending lots of loves and hugs. Putting pressure on is, when are you going to do this? I thought you said you'd do that, you know, and trying to, and they're very different. And you can have as much of the kind, warm love stuff, because that always goes down well. So there's not a set, but you've got to differentiate is, when am I asking this person to actively do something, or when am I actually just telling them not that I'm there? And they're two very different things. So showing love, support, care, and nurturing, you know, when mum's not particularly been, and this is still the case to today, she was in hospital 2 weeks ago. But you know, when she's going through an episode, it might be once a week that I send her a message, just say, Mum, I'm here. I love you. If you need me, just send me a message. If you need anything, just send me a message. And I might not hear anything for 10 days. And then I get, hi, Dan, just got out of hospital. I'm back at home now, not feeling great. You know, gonna have a couple of days just at home. But I'll give you a shout when I'm ready. And I say, no problem. Let me know if you need anything.
It's often, I guess, so talking about pressure there, it's probably the pressure we put on ourselves. You know, we're worrying about, are we doing too much? Are we doing too little? You know, and actually it's almost stepping back and thinking, I have done that. You know, I that person knows I love them. You know, they know I'm here. I'm going to continue to do that. Sometimes they may reply, sometimes they may not. And that's okay, I think. But yeah,
absolutely. And then we're asking ourselves the questions, is it for them or is it for ourselves? Are we doing it for ourselves to be like, oh, I've ticked that box, or I've made sure? But you know, if we're doing it from a place of kindness and genuine care and consideration, there is not too much or too little. There's, you know, what you feel is appropriate. There's not a specific amount of you know, I've also had times where I'm happy to, like, my mum's gone, you know, you're selfish, blah, 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 blah. You don't care about anyone but yourself and blah, blah. And I go, breathe, you know, she doesn't mean that. Sometimes I just leave it on loudspeaker. She's shouting and she's swearing over the phone at me. And then I just don't respond to it. I say, okay, mum, I'm sorry you feel like that. And, you know, I'll get back to you when I can. 3 days later, I call her back up and things are just normal. There's not even an apology. There's nothing, but it's just, we both understand that she didn't mean that. And it's
very honest. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of it is kind of being patient as well, you know, with people, and not expecting things to get better immediately. You know, things often take a while to recover, don't they?
Yeah.
There's been an interesting one that kind of follows on nicely from that. So someone's asked about, and I understand, is how to fight an urge to fix a family member's mental health struggle, rather than just listening. So you and I both know we're both half-trained counsellors on kind of how to listen. So actually that's a really good one, because I think, as you know, we're taught to read and write, aren't we? But we're never actually taught to listen. And some people are really, really good at being able to just be natural listeners. Others, you know, it doesn't perhaps come quite as naturally. And I think we often wait for our opportunity to speak. We're not really listening, or we're not really giving someone that space. So that's a really good question, actually. How do you fight that urge to be able to try to fix something rather than just sitting back and listen? Have you got, so give some listening skills tips?
Well, I think that's an amazing point, and about listening, and you know, active listening. You guys can Google how to active listen. It's not rocket science, and there's lots and lots of really cool material out there. But what I do find really interesting about this is the whole thing of being a fixer, and for me, I had the responsibility of mum, sisters, everyone. And so when a problem came in, my default was to go back with a solution, because if it was money, I could afford it. Like, this is broken, you got a new one on the way. This is so that stuff was the easy stuff, but the emotional stuff was not the easy stuff. And I only learned this last year on a counseling course, how much of a fixer I am. And actually what it boiled down to was, me being a fixer was more about me, because it was about my fastest way to get to a solution, so I didn't have to keep taking on that burden. And I only learned this very recently. And so, prime example, my sister, you know, messaged me and said something like, I said, oh, how was work? And she said, oh, it's annoying, the bike tire punctured. So I'm immediately like, I'm on Amazon finding her a new bike in a tube. Whereas actually, when I called it, she said, oh, Dan, it's fine. Like, I didn't want the bike anyway, and I've decided to give it away. But I hadn't asked her what she needed. It was, I hadn't checked in, what do you need? Like, what would make this more comfortable for you? How can I help you? And I didn't ask any of that. I just went, broken tire, must need a new inner tube, order it, get it there, done. You know?
Yeah.
So I think it's about staying present. Meditation and mindfulness are other good exercises when people are talking to you and you get distracted, and we all do it. You know, you get a bit bored if someone's not talking about something that interests you or that you can associate with, your mind wanders, but then it's just coming back to your breath. Wiggle your toes. If you know, if I'm on camera now here and you can't see, you know, I could tap the chair and just wiggle my toes, and that brings me back to the present rather than
I think that's one of the skills to learn, isn't it? That how to be present with somebody, and how just, and also not to fear silences. I think we often fear, you know, that we're going to ask someone something and then there'll be a silence. How do we feel that? And actually, silences can be really, really kind of important, I think, and powerful, because it gives someone the opportunity to kind of think of what they're saying and then verbalize it. And I think the other thing, which is a good listening skills tip, is to not allow your immediate thoughts, not to give them your immediate thoughts, because actually what your immediate thoughts might be when they first start talking is then very different when they've then
absolutely yeah totally. It's and that comes to being a fixer again. Someone we get so excited in conversation sometimes that we just chop over the other person, but actually if we let them finish their thought and have that little pause on the end, like you say, what we were going to respond with might be totally different. You might be like, oh, I'm actually glad I didn't really say that. Because what you're doing is you're creating, when you're trying to fit, you're creating autonomy. You're creating this space for that individual to come to their own conclusions and therefore be kind of self-sufficient and self-dependent. If we constantly are there fixing everything, we don't allow the space for the person to self-manage, self-regulate themselves. Self-governance is actually the word, but that's really important for someone feeling like I've got through something myself and I've managed to understand and process myself. And whenever I go and pick my little niece up from school, or when I was picking her up from school, I say, how was your day? And she go, yeah, good. I'd just stay silent, like it'd be awkward. And then she'd look up and look at me, and then we just keep walking, and I'd look at her and she'd be like, and Mrs. blah, blah, blah made this today as well. And she's ready to, but she's almost waiting for that permission to speak, because she knows that she's learning that the default is someone asks how you are, you give them a quick response and that's it. You wait until you're off. Whereas actually it's not. If you create that space, and it can be very awkward, but it's quite funny sometimes. You're in a car with someone, you just ask an open question. You sat in a car with someone, you ask an open question, you don't respect, see how long you can be quiet for. And the stuff that comes out is really cool, because giving the person the space.
It is a very powerful skill, listening, I think. And I think as well, it's that thing that we think we have to overcomplicate. You know, we should be doing this to help somebody, we should be doing that, when actually I think listening, being able to listen is one of the most powerful things you can do, I think. Really. So just
it's the whole foundation of most counselling is listening. You know, when you learn to be a counsellor, you just sat there learning how to listen and reflect what the other person's saying. That's like the first 6 months of your training is just listening.
And paraphrasing back, because what that does is that helps to build the trust between two people. So if somebody knows they've properly been listened to and you can paraphrase exactly what they've said back to them, that helps with the trust, and then that all kind of, you know, links in with your relationship with them, you know, their ability to share more with you, creating that kind of open culture about talking. So, you know, they all have a bit of a knock-on effect, don't they, really? Okay, right, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm not sure we're going to get through all these questions, but we'll go with it. So Ruth has asked on here, so somebody with a mental health illness has opened up to you, but you realize they're solely using negative coping mechanisms. How do you help them when they think that what they've been doing is normal, or is the norm?
Okay, so negative coping mechanisms. Can you hear me properly? There was a little like, you know, when your voice goes,
we're good. So, we can hear you.
Yeah, we're good. Okay. By negative coping mechanisms, I'm gonna assume alcohol, or
I would assume unhelpful coping. So probably yes, alcohol, perhaps over fitness, bad food, etc.
Okay, yeah. Well, if someone is using unhealthy coping mechanisms, it's tough, because you can't, you know, if you can try and regulate a person while you're in there and say don't do that, but all that happens when you tell someone not to do something is they go out and they do it anyway. So, you know, I think the educational side of like, how is this, or I noticed that when you do this, this happens. Or I just wanted to let you know that and talk about it from your perspective and let them decide whether they want to act on it or they want to keep, what did I have to do with my mum? I had to say, when you call me up and you shout down the phone and tell me these things and do that, it makes me feel sad, and it makes me feel like I haven't done enough as a son. And she might not even ever respond, but I just say how it makes me feel, because no one likes being told what to do. But you have to come to your own conclusion yourself. And I've noticed in the past, I don't know, like I stopped drinking kind of on Jan the 2nd or 3rd or whatever it was. Haven't drank since, and my head has felt so clear. Work, productive, like family relationships, like so much has been going well for me since taking alcohol. And I'm not saying don't drink, because people do it but I've kind of learned that any drinking I do now should come from a place when things are good rather than they're bad. And if I drink because I'm celebrating the moment of like, this is amazing, look at, you've got the job or you've got this, rather than, oh, what a long day, need a glass.
I think that's actually really relevant at the moment, because I know a lot of people feel like they're probably drinking more than they ever have done.
Yeah.
And just to touch on that, along that line of that question, alcohol can be an unhelpful coping strategy. I know I definitely used to use alcohol as a self-medicating tool.
Yeah.
But I think what you have to do, and to answer Ruth's question a little bit with how you would perhaps talk to someone about that, is look at the two. So it can also be a nice thing to do, like you say, but it's chatting about when you're using it. Are you using it because, like you say, you've got something nice to do, it's something to look forward to, it's, you're doing it because you're in a good place, or are you reaching for alcohol just to try to stop other things that are going on in your heads or things that are going on outside? And then it's about starting that conversation, because sometimes when you're doing them, you're using them, you don't really realize, because as she mentioned there, you feel like that's normal. It's normal for me to have a bottle of wine at night. That's what I do.
Yeah.
And I think it's about having that conversation. Actually, let's look at why we're doing that. Why, and eventually you have to allow people to come to their own kind of conclusions.
Yeah, it's self-awareness, it's accountability, it's responsibility. And that's why I think what you say, that's why it's so important, this notion of like, I've noticed that when you do this, like you're in a bad mood the next day, or when you do this, you can be slightly this or you can be slightly that. I just wanted to let you know, like, from my perspective, and that's fine. That's allowed to say what your view of the situation is, because that person has then got to decide, well, 3 times I've done this, I've done X, Y, and Z, and it's made my partner or family member unhappy. Do I want to change that? But actually going in and saying, don't do, you need help. It's just that person is using these coping mechanisms because that's maybe all they know at the time. And that's all they understand. And,
I think it's about reframing it, isn't it? It's about reframing, why they're doing it and coming in at a different angle. But yeah, I think that's probably a very common issue that people perhaps have at the moment at home, with less than helpful coping strategies.
So one thing, just add on so I started with these non-alcoholic beers, and I realized actually at the end of it that all it was for me was the thing of picking up a cold bottle, like a cold bottle, and just sip it. So you'd be surprised, you'd surprise yourself when you think, once you've had that non-alcohol, you're never sitting there going like, oh, I wish I had some alcohol in there. You're like, you're actually, what it is about picking that thing up and trying it. And like, Waitrose has got this non-alcoholic bread that we're really excited to try now. We haven't tried it yet, and it's probably not going to be the same, but you realize just what is a part of your routine and pattern and habitual behavior. Yeah,
it can be, for sure. All right, I think we've got time for 2 more questions. So I think if we just go back to that, I think there are a lot of people on with children at the moment, so one thing that somebody said is their 10-year-old seems to be more upset in this lockdown with things. They've tried all the kind of standard things we've read about, going out for walks. Are there any kind of little hacks that we could offer? I've got a couple, but I don't know. I mean, like we've got 9 nieces and nephews between us, so we have kind of had an understanding of how difficult some of this has been for people, I think. But have you got any? I tell you what, the one you said about the numbers, you got any other tips like that? I think they're quite handy, actually.
this is going to be an out of the box answer as well, because I feel like a lot of this stuff you could just Google, right? And I tell you why. So we're saying what the question has come in is, what do I do for my child? What about asking them what they would like, what they would like to do for themselves? What would make you happy? Or what would it, flip it round with that's the fixer again. And I can say, listen, what I want you to do is I want you to come in and I want you to write on a board every morning how you're feeling. Okay, but is that kid actually even want to do that? Do you know what I mean? Are they interested in that? If you want a practical little thing, there's a psychologist called Mark Brackett. He's got this book called Permission to Feel. And one of the things he's got is this thing called a mood meter. And you can just download it online. You don't need to buy the book, but just get it online. It's called the mood meter. And it shows you 150 different descriptions of what your mood is. And they're in colors. So red is hot and they're the angries. Here is like, then you've got yellow, which is happy, warm, and it kind of goes by color. Get that, print it out, stick it on the fridge, and get every morning, stick a magnet in. How are you feeling? Get used to talking about feelings and emotions. Get used to having a morning check-in. Get used to having an evening check-in. Make it part of our daily routine. And increase that vocabulary.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. I think we often put so much pressure on ourselves that we need to fix these things. What can I do for my child? When actually, like you say, same, with adults, what can let's do it together, see what they want.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of nice things actually. And there was somebody had recommended writing a family COVID agreement. So you all kind of sit down together. And normally, for instance, the child's allowed on for an hour on their iPad, but at the moment they're not able to go and play with their friends and those other things. So maybe through COVID, they're perhaps allowed on a little bit longer, and that's the family COVID agreement. It's about setting a different routine because they've lost their routine, which is potentially unsettling.
I like that. I think that's really nice. And I think what we're getting into is collaboration. We're getting into the child or the adult having some say in what's going to be happening. And that is what's really powerful, because if you go to a child and you say, okay, I know you haven't been feeling great and I know you're sad and you're missing all your mates, like what would make you happy? What would you like to do? Oh, well, actually, do you know what I would like to do? I'd love to bake a cake, but do it on FaceTime so I can bake with my friend and we both bake a cake together. Then at the end of that, once they've done that, you say, well, how do you feel? They're going to subconsciously feel obligated to say, I'm feeling better because they suggested it. Do you see what I mean? But if you say, I want you to think of 3 things that you like, and it's kind of autocratic. It's not allowing them the space to be human and individual and do what they need to do for them. Like my little niece, she started creating makeup. So she said to my sister, can I get some brown sugar and this and this? She's got these little she makes these little like face scrubs and stuff. But that's what she's into at the moment, making a beauty shop, and she's 11, But that's her thing.
And it's her choice. The other one that is a good one, just to pop in before the end, is creating a worry box. So if your child doesn't feel comfortable with being able to talk or doesn't really know what they're thinking, or how to verbalize it, have a worry box at home where they can put their thoughts or feelings or drawings in this worry box that you have a look at. And then you don't go to them immediately, but when you're baking or when you're, out for a walk, you just kind of gently bring things up, or sometimes you don't bring it up at all. You don't necessarily need to talk about it. It's just understanding how they might be feeling. So I think that was quite a nice one as well.
Worry box is lovely. And a diary, if kids are up for it, if they're up for it, like journaling. I know it wasn't something that I was ever into, journaling and writing, and I don't do it sort of every day. But when I have thoughts and ideas or worries, I do write them out, because once it's out, it's kind of like you've thrown it out onto a paper, and kids might come out in drawing something, that might come out in doing some Lego with something, whatever. But try and get it out of your mind and into something in front of you that you can see objectively. Okay, that's it there, and that too will pass. Meditation, mindful. Like I listen to Calm before I go to bed, little 10 minutes. My partner, she's a nanny, and she's got 3 little kids that she looks after, and she goes in, and when she meets them in the morning now, she does a 10-minute meditation with them. They love it, but it's called Sleeping Lions that she kind of frames it. But she's like, focus on your breath, and she sends me pictures, and they love it, and then she lets them take turn. So again, it's about giving people the space to do what's best for them and understand what's best for them. And if they say, I don't really know, then offer some suggestions and have a look online at things together. But initially say, what do you need? What would be best for you?
I think that is a nice place to leave it. We are 3 minutes away from 2 o'clock, so everybody has probably had their lunch. Danny, thank you so much. I hope that this has been helpful for people. We've got about 7 other questions that have come in, so we will attempt to answer those separately to everybody as well. Thank you for sending all your stuff in. I've just got one final question before we finish. What are you having on your pancakes tonight?
That for me, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a lemon and sugar man myself.
Right.
Keep
Traditional.
it simple. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. That's a good
That's
motto.
the theme for the, yeah. Keep it simple. Back to
For
basics.
sure. Lovely. Danny, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely rest of your day, and we will see you soon.